Well, ladies and gentlemen, maybe now we're getting reasonable sound, and I'm going to assume that we're getting reasonable sound. And apologies for those people who've been trying to follow this and it not really working very well. But as with technology, you never know. All sorts of things may happen, and this is live, so we don't know exactly what's happening. Anyway, so this is the e-conference for Parents Want to Say, and I'm hoping that Karen from Gloucestershire will speak later. We may have other speakers later on, maybe not in this segment, but maybe in another live stream later on this evening. What I'd like to do is to look at the issues as they've come up, just in a summary basis. Obviously, those people who are looking at this know the campaign is about the new rules. When we say new, that's now going back into 2013, which have removed essentially the discretion from head teachers to allow term time absences for various reasons, and the gradual movement, for instance, towards refusing to accept that children are ill unless there's a doctor's note, which has resulted, for instance, in parents sending their children to school ill so that they get sent home, so that people don't get prosecuted for not sending a child to school because they think they're ill when they're not ill, which is all a bit silly and doesn't really work out very well. Now, as with many things, the objective is laudable, which is that children do better at school. But then what you need to do, really, is to work out whether there is evidence to say that the system that existed before 2013 was in itself causing problems. Interestingly, the government used to encourage, for staggering holidays purposes, for people to take term time absence and term time holidays. So there's been a complete reversal over the last 40 or 50 years from a situation which was encouraged by central government to one where people get prosecuted if they don't do it with the permission of the school. There are some interesting pieces of information. There was specific work done by the head teacher at King Catholic Primary School, Reading, and I've summarised some of that on the video as we're going through. And basically, for the 2014 period, he found that, in fact, the children who had term time holiday particularly did better in school. For those in 2013, the same principle applied, as you can see on the screen. And what's interesting is the government did some really quite good quality research in 2011, which is on the screen. And you see the sort of light blue line, which, although it's difficult to tell, that's authorised family holidays. And you can see in the summary, basically, how it says that, in fact, it's just a bit difficult to read, so I'll try and move it a bit. The likelihood of pupils achieving the expected KS2 level not only differ greatly by the amount of absences accrued, but also by the different reasons behind these absences, chart 4.4, which you can see below. The proportions of pupils achieving the expected level stay relatively similar for increasing levels of absence due to authorised family holidays, religious observance and study leave. However, long-term absences due to exclusions or illnesses tend to be associated with significantly lower proportions of pupils achieving the expected level. A lot of that's not really surprising, because if children are ill, they're unlikely to be learning at the time. But the nub of it is it says that, particularly for primary schools, that even authorised family holidays don't actually impact on the children's education. There has been a debate, and this is in the background, we can hear Big Ben going, but there has been a debate about whether or not this is an issue of human rights. And in fact, it is an issue of human rights. Actually, if I can just get rid of that screen first. Article 8 says basically that if the government is going to interfere in family life, then there should be good evidence for it. And in fact, there isn't good evidence for it. The evidence is that the interventions of the government are unnecessary. And then you get the note here, which is a note from a school. I don't know how legible it'll be when it's finally live streamed, but it says on this particular note, from a school to parents, it's becoming obvious that some parents and carers are trying to avoid being fined by telling them their child is poorly. Obvious because children come back heavily tanned, or because we hear a foreign ringtone when we call. Some of the children are quite open about having been away, and some let it slip. One parent told us that when she mentioned asking for a holiday form, their child said, why not lie, everyone else does. And actually, it's all rather sad if a system that's been operated by the government is encouraging people to be dishonest, which is not at all helpful. So if we now move back, I have to put my earpiece back in. Down in Gloucestershire, we have Karen on Skype. Hello, Karen.
Hi, John.
That's good. The sound sounds good.
Good.
You can hear me.
Well,
Right.
I can hear you very well, actually.
Well, that's quite good as well. So hopefully people who are listening to this will also be able to hear you.
Good, good. And hopefully no children will come rushing in a minute demanding something.
Well, with a bit of luck. So, Karen, what do you want to say?
I think really we've had, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of private messages and literally thousands of posts on the Facebook page, and the number of issues that parents have are really quite wide. But I think what would be really useful is if parents understand perhaps what they should be doing when they ask for holiday in the first instance, and then what they can do if the holiday is not authorised by teachers, and what to do if they get fined and so on. Because we're asked an awful lot for advice and help on that side.
I think the nub of the issue is that when people ask for the opportunity to leave, for term time absence, the school is required to follow the Human Rights Act 1998, and that means that there should be evidence at that stage that it will be harmful to the child for them to be refused permission. One of the difficulties parents want to say have is that people tend to contact us not at the time when they're asking for permission, but actually at a time when they've been refused permission, have been fined, not paid the fine, and are facing prosecution. It's actually much harder to challenge that decision at that stage than at the earlier stage. Now, we do have some draft letters which give the arguments on the basis of the evidence is it doesn't do any harm to the children, particularly in primary school, and secondly, ways in which you can then write what's called a pre-action protocol letter for judicial review to challenge the school's arguments as to why permission should be not given. So those we have been working on those, and it's very important to stay in touch with people in Parents Want to Say if you're going through that process.
Yes, because what we're finding is that when we help parents write letters, we say to them, these are special circumstances, and say why you're going on the holiday, and also cover the fact that you will expect to help your children catch up with anything that they might miss. What we're finding is that when parents are refused, if we are helping parents write letters back which refer to the Human Rights Act and schools' obligations to consider the child's individual circumstances and not just impose a blanket ban under the legislation there, that actually quite often schools back down, and when they don't back down, they at least don't issue a fine. When we've issued, I don't know how many pre-judicial review, pre-action protocol letters, John, which you might want to talk a bit more about. We're finding that, I think in 100% of the cases, the schools have backed down, which is why we're not able to test this in the courts at the moment, because no schools will stand up for it, or local authorities will stand up for it. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to make all that a bit clearer to people.
Yeah, I think the point about the first step of the decision. You see, the difficulty is obviously at the later stages. It's harder to test things because actually it's called a strict liability offence when somebody is prosecuted for this issue, because it's a question of facts like speeding. You're not allowed to give any excuse for speeding. The fact is you were speeding. And similarly, you're not allowed to have an excuse at the prosecutory stage. Although we have won cases, the Haymore case was one, and various others have been won. A case where a lady, Kerry Capper, had kept her daughter off school because she was worried that the daughter was ill, and got prosecuted for that. That was actually was found not guilty. Normally, people, if they've got a good argument, will get a conditional or absolute discharge, but they may end up paying court fees, which could be of the order of £650. So it's quite a heavy situation. The basic point is when the school makes the original decision, they're supposed to base it on evidence as to effect on the individual child. That hasn't been happening. You can't really blame the schools at times because they're under pressure from Ofsted, and Ofsted really measure the numbers, so they're not focusing on what's important for the school. They're focusing on targets and numbers, and you must change this number. So they put severe pressure on the schools and the heads to refuse absence, and then the system churns people up from there onwards. And the point about the pre-action protocol letter is it's a letter that's written saying that we think you've made this decision contrary to the law. That is, you haven't assessed the individual circumstances of the child, and if you don't explain the basis of the decision or reverse the decision, then we will take you to court. And obviously it hasn't got past that because people have generally been sensible and followed the law. But it is a complex thing. Obviously, it varies in different circumstances as to the precise, the basis of the argument.
Yes, I mean, one of the things actually that's interesting is that when I spoke to the Department for Education, actually they were of the opinion that Ofsted don't look at attendance figures until such time as the school is in special measures, or not special measures, but is failing in other ways. And at that point, the Ofsted will look at attendance. And that's not the same as what head teachers are saying to us. Head teachers are saying, no, my attendance figures are looked at very closely by Ofsted. So there does seem to be, and quite a lot of what we're seeing, a big disparity between what the DFE is saying and what head teachers are saying. And I think for anyone who feels that, this is parents battling against the education system, I think it's quite easy when you just look at the cases that parents want to say get, to think that this is something where all teachers and all head teachers think that all children should be in school at all times, regardless of circumstances. But actually that's not the case. We have a lot of support from head teachers and from teachers and from a range of people in the education profession saying this rule just simply isn't workable. Of course you treat each child on an individual basis. To the point that someone in the NUT, I think, was putting forward a proposal that it should be a policy at their conference to get this rule reversed. So it's not, and I don't know as yet whether or not that's gone through. So it's not something where all head teachers and all teachers are universally behind this rule. So actually don't assume that when you go to your school you won't be met with a perfectly sensible response, because probably in the vast majority of cases you will be. It's only in some cases some head teachers and some teachers are saying, no, this is the rule that I've been given and I don't have any leeway to interpret it. Actually, what we're saying is the human rights legislation and indeed teachers' common sense does enable them to allow authorised holidays. So don't feel worried about asking in the first case. Because one of the things we've had recently, John, is a lady who did lie about whether she was the fact that she was going on holiday, and was caught out by a picture on Facebook when somebody ratted on her to the school, and she took down the picture, I believe, and made it clear that actually wasn't anything to do. It was an old picture, and it wasn't anything to do with her children. Subsequently sort of produced evidence to say that she had been at home, but it was a very difficult situation, and she's sort of, I think, in a situation where they're now going to reach some sort of compromise. But it's been an extremely stressful thing. The school and the local authority and so on are absolutely hounding her about the fact that they say that she went on holiday and they know that she did. And the fact that she's producing evidence to say she didn't isn't, it's not cutting any ice with them, because they know jolly well that she went on holiday. So, in those situations, things can get very nasty. And if you can possibly avoid that, we would recommend that, I think.
Yeah, I think the nub of it is to deal with things properly at the first possible stage. Now, I've put up another screen which has a Skype address on it. And if anyone does want to try and Skype in and ask a question, if they send an instant message to that Skype account, whilst this is streaming, not whilst this is obviously recorded as a video, because this will stay, hopefully, if the sound's all right, this will stay on YouTube ad infinitum, really. But I think the emphasis on this is actually the National Association of Head Teachers has been very good. And maybe about half of head teachers would actually like to just go back to the previous rules, which they did a survey which was published some time ago. So this is not... Well, what we have actually is, for laudable reasons in one sense from central government, but through incompetence and the failure to do proper research, although there was proper research done in 2011, but the more recent statistics published by the government have been done by lumping together all types of absence, which makes it meaningless in many ways. So, for laudable reasons, they've changed the law, set a statutory instrument, and the outcome from this is causing a battle between teachers and head teachers and parents, when everybody really is trying to do the best thing for the kids. But obviously different people have different lives and their different circumstances. So some people, like police officers, are told when they take holiday. They don't have any flexibility as to when to take holiday. And that still remains a problem within the system. And at some stage it will be tested in court, but that, as we said, has generally been not happened so far, simply because when the pre-action protocol letter has been written, a solution has been found which has worked for all parties concerned. So that's been quite a reasonable situation. Now, Karen, has anyone actually instant messaged you?
We have got a couple of questions actually. One is an ongoing one, which is around parental responsibility. So we're seeing people being fined who don't actually have parental responsibility for the children, and it's causing, today's families can be quite complex, as you know, and this is causing a bit of an issue. So, for example, had a lady recently where the partner received fines, and he is her partner. He has no parental responsibility for the children, who are still in contact with their own father, who didn't get fined, and obviously they're quite pleased about that because he didn't actually have a say in the holiday, and they were told that actually, as far as the school was concerned, her partner had parental responsibility. And the local authority said, if you want to challenge this in any way in court, then social services will get involved and your parenting skills will be put under the microscope, which obviously was really rather scary for the family concerned. So that issue about who can get fined and who can't, and what can you do if the wrong people are issued with the fines, can you explore that at all? John, I've lost you. Now, I don't know whether I'm the one that can't hear John or John is the one who can't hear me.
Right, can you hear me now? Actually, we might be best ending this at this point, because it appears that it's stopped working. Never mind. Well, thank you for everybody who's followed the live streaming, and anyone who's watched this, if we leave it up, depending on how the video is, and we'll have another go some other time. Hiya.
Hi,
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. I don't know how long I was whittling away to myself. Or
Well, actually, I think we're still broadcasting.
Right, okay.
Let me just check.
No.
We're not broadcasting.
Okay.
Yes, it's still broadcasting.
We are still broadcasting.
This is my test run.
Well, there we go.
I don't know how much of what have you heard of the question about parental responsibility.
Yeah, I heard about the question about parental responsibility, and that's obviously an issue which we need to look at in some detail, because it's very unfair to punish one person for the decisions and actions of another person, where the one person cannot actually influence those decisions in a direct sense. So there's clearly a problem there, but there are a lot of problems with this policy. I think perhaps also, given that we're at a period before the general election, it would be a good idea for those people who are electors to ask the candidates who come canvassing as to what their views are on changing the rules in respect of this, because it is clearly an issue which is developing as a problem, and the issues with illness continue to develop as a problem. Anyway, so Karen, now we're still running again. I shall put my earpiece back in. The reason I keep it out of my ear is because there's a slight delay, and it's very confusing having your voice about a second behind when you say things. So go back to Karen.
Yeah, so John, just to ask this question again, for this lady that we're trying to help. So if this thing about the local authority threatening parents with social services seems to me to be quite an abuse of power, frankly. And it ties in with the illness. We're getting more and more questions now where, people are really putting the pressure on parents, not only to prove that their child has been ill, but questioning whether there is something wrong with them as parents if their children are ill. And we're seeing a lot of cases where, a fair few, where children have, they've maybe fractured an arm, and then they have an asthma attack, and then they have a bug, and then this happens. So it's a series of individual, unrelated events, and they're getting pulled in for lots of case conferences, but when they ask for one because they want to resolve an issue, they're being told that's not appropriate, it's only down to the school to ask for one. I just wondered if you had any advice for people about what they can do in those circumstances. Is there anywhere that they can go? Because we don't have the expertise, I don't think, to really help people on those very difficult, complex cases.
Well, yes, you go there into issues like those faced by the King family, who left the country because of wanting to get a second opinion as to what would happen to their son Asher. And obviously, I do deal with a different hat on through the Justice of Families arena. We do deal with people who are on the receiving end of strange behaviour from the state. And interestingly, more recently, the Latvian Parliament has passed a resolution through two committees writing to the UK Parliament, say, "Oi, stop stealing our children," and saying that the UK is not following international law in that area, which in a sense is similar to the situation on term time absence, where international law, the European Convention of Human Rights, is not being followed in the UK because proper assessment is not being done. The difficulty with those cases, they all get very, very complicated. And the problem people face is that most of the cards are held by the local authority. And in fact, even you find very often the lawyers that purport to represent parents at times actually are also employed by the local authority on other jobs and face a conflict of interest. That's a very, very difficult environment. I would suggest that people do try and contact some of the advice organisations in that area, but it is actually quite a difficult thing to fight, and a lot of changes are needed to improve the way all of that works. Anyway, back to Karen.
Yeah, so if we were to go back to sort of say very simply, this is what happens if you ask for holiday, just so that people are clear. So you ask for holiday, you hope that it's authorised. If it's not authorised, you might decide to go anyway, which is, we believe you're right. And that when you come back, you may get a fine. Now, the idea is that you must pay that fine within so many days, and if not, it will go from £60 per parent per child up to £120. And then if you still don't pay it after the 28 days, or 21 days, I've seen some situation, I'm not entirely sure, then you will be taken to court. Now, when you get a letter saying, if you don't pay this fine, we will take you to court without any further reminders, please do take that seriously, because we've seen cases where people have thought, well, I'll wait until they remind me. Well, they don't remind you, they take you to court. And they don't take people to court for non-payment of fine, they take them for non-attendance at school under section 4441, I think, John, isn't it, of the Education Act.
I think you're probably right.
And that's the bit that John was talking about, having no, it's a very sort of strict liability thing. In order to not, to get off that charge, you have to essentially prove that it was physically impossible to get your child to school that day, because the tight interpretation that the courts have taken on the statute and the nature of the statute itself. So that's what we've been trying to do with taking cases to court, is to shift the law along there, I think, on the definition of regular attendance as much as anything else, John. as well as the human rights aspects.
The difficulty people face is that if you don't pay the fine, it then doubles, and then you go to court. Even if you win and get a conditional discharge, it could cost £1,000. And so unless somebody is really combative and quite happy to spend however much money it takes to fight it, it's best, if you want to challenge it, you challenge the original refusal with the challenges there, because much that there are areas we as a campaign would like to challenge, people need to be aware of the risks they face. So my personal advice to people in these circumstances is you really need to be challenging it at the refusal stage, which is where everything kicks off, and that has to be done through the process of initially the pre-action protocol for judicial review, and then review all of that, because you're on a hiding to nothing to some extent trying to fight the system later, because you're trying to unravel a lot of the issues which have gone earlier, and there's a lot of hazard to that, and people need to be aware of the issues at every step of the way. Anyway, Karen.
Yeah, because we've got a few people that we've been in contact with and sort of been following their cases, and I mean, one gentleman who's really now suffering from a mental illness because he's had such difficulty in fighting this, and actually when you get to that point, it's very hard for us to give any advice whatsoever, and it's very easy to see how actually one can make one's case much worse. And so I think it was some poor chap who's now being counter-sued for harassment, because it becomes very personal. I think this is something which the system doesn't really understand. There is nothing more personal to a parent than their child, and the relationship between child and the parent is just the single most personal thing that there is in the world. And for the state to come along and say, well, no, because we've got some statistics, that's not the case, can infuriate people beyond measure. And we all feel very passionately about that, and I think that's one thing that just simply isn't understood by some local authority officers and by some head teachers, and certainly by certain people in the Department for Education. They don't understand that this is a very personal thing and really should not be being treated the way that it is. Another question that we've had, or another issue that's come up actually, John, and you were talking about asking candidates in the election period about what's their party's view. Parents want to say is not aligned to any particular political party. It happens that John and I are both members of a party. So I think we've got to be very careful about how we go forward in the election, can't we, John? Because we can't ask, because of the transparency law, we can't ask, parents want to say cannot endorse any particular candidate, is that right?
Well, no. The issue...
The candidates in North Devon.
The situation is actually that the transparency law means that if we did spend over I think £20,000, we'd have to declare what money was spent in endorsing candidates. Parents want to say doesn't spend in total even about £2,000 a year, as far as I understand at the moment. That's on everything. So the parents want to say could quite readily endorse candidates, but we'd have to make a collective decision to do that. The Lobbying Act doesn't actually prevent endorsing candidates. It just means that if you spend a lot of money endorsing candidates, you should declare what money you spend.
Right, so if we have, I know that independent candidates looking to stand in North Devon on this issue, because obviously it's we've talked about how it affects parents, but actually it's a very serious issue for the travel industry as well, for people who work in the travel industry and for people with small businesses. And I think it's on those bases that there are candidates in North Devon who want to stand because of the impact this is having on the tourism industry.
Well, obviously. Sorry about that. That's something I wasn't aware of, and obviously, as a member of a political party, I can't encourage people to oppose candidates in my own party or anything else like that, as is a standard thing. Whether parents want to say we'll collectively decide to endorse any candidates, I don't know. I wouldn't have thought we'll go that far. I think we just emphasise the point that it is an election. You can ask people what their views are on the issue and see what their views are, and see which candidates agree with parents and which candidates disagree with parents.
Yes, and I think we have asked all the political parties to tell us what their manifesto or what their commitment is either way on this, and when we get any responses worth publishing, then we will publish them. We just on the issue of sick notes, which came up again which came up very recently, the issue about medical evidence if your child is off sick. We had CITO of letters from schools saying we will now be asking for medical evidence after 3 days of 3 days of absence. And there was a letter in the Times from a GP saying, "You are joking, really, I'm seeing my surgery full up with sick children," which takes appointments away from people who are generally not well, and really needs to stop. So we understand that the head teacher of the school, one of the letters that we've written, is now reconsidering that position. And interestingly, when I spoke to both Alan Folds, who was on BBC Breakfast with me last weekend, and another teacher, both members of the ASCL, it wasn't something that that head teachers are generally aware of. It's not something that's come down from the DFE as "thou shalt always ask for medical evidence after 3 days." It's very much just a matter of this change in the definition of persistent absence and the whole general pressure around attendance, where some head teachers had picked it up and chosen to make this decision. That was their view. And again, it's very much an individual head teacher's decision. And I think if in that situation, parents should feel happy to challenge it. It's not, I'm just saying, please show me in black and white where it says from the Department for Education that you should be asking for this medical evidence, because actually our understanding is the guidance from the department actually says that teachers and head teachers shouldn't be over enthusiastic in this area. So that might be a bit of a note of optimism.
There is, of course, a difficulty for schools, because if they come under pressure to reduce sickness absence, and it's actually because the children are ill, you then get into the situation where the schools are between a rock and a hard place, and it's very, very difficult for them to handle. So I think a lot of responsibility of this lies with Ofsted. And to be fair, if children are ill and if they're very ill, they're not going to learn very well, so it will have an effect on achievement. But to move into the territory of prosecuting parents when their children are ill, as has effectively happened with Kerry Kappa, is not a sensible way of dealing with things. Anyway, Karen?
Yeah, so, and again, children going back into school before they're well, I don't think it works for the children longer term if they haven't had a chance to recuperate properly. And I'm pretty sure that it doesn't help other children if there are more bugs flying, or teachers for that matter, if there are more bugs flying around in the school. One question we've got here is, should an MP be in a position to help a parent who's been refused a term time holiday? Well, we know that some MPs do. John, does this very much depend on what their individual attitude is to effectively whether they've swallowed these statistics on there being no better place for children to be than in school?
It may, individual members may do things in different ways. You do find that some MPs will do things and some won't.
Okay, trying to see what else we've got. We've got most of the things I think that the recent cases that we've had have either been very specific individual cases about people wanting to go and see family overseas, or about family overseas coming here. We've had situations, cases recently where, lady has had, her father die after a certain amount of illness, and then a holiday refused, and so on. And again, those have all been cases where we could have helped if we'd known about them earlier, but finding out after the fine has been issued has been too difficult for us, I think, really, to get anything on that. So I've got another question, it looks like, coming up, John, so I don't know if you've got anything else to say while I just wait for this to come up and stop distracting me. I'm not very good at doing this yet.
Right, well, yeah, it is difficult. No, you're there, Karen.
Oh, right, sorry, I lost you there, I couldn't hear anything, so I don't
All
know
right.
whether you've asked me a question.
Yes, have you got any? Did you get?
The question I've got here...
Sorry about that. Did you get the question through that you said you were getting through?
Yes, is how do we get this raised in Parliament again for debate, whoever's in office after the election?
Well, the simple solution will be to get an e-petition and do it through that route. Obviously, I'm personally in a marginal seat, so I don't know whether I'm going to win or lose as yet. If I get re-elected, obviously, I've been campaigning on family issues in the last Parliament and this Parliament, and I will continue campaigning on this. But I think we shouldn't have too much of a problem getting up 100,000 signatures for another e-petition. That would be a very easy way of getting it. But we've actually got to get the government to be a bit more rational, because the difficulty in many ways has been...
I've lost you again, John. Right, it sounds like maybe, according to Sarah, that people can hear me, but perhaps not John. Certainly I've lost John. One thing I was going to ask him, because I know John does a lot of work for parents who are having difficulties with the system in all sorts of ways, is actually how's he finding the direction of travel? Because one of the things that I've been absolutely astonished by with all the work that we've been doing on Parents Want to Say is really the number of very hard cases that there are out there. The awful situation where a child who is in foster care, for instance, got taken from foster carers he'd been doing really well with and moved purely because of local authority finances, and ended up in, instead of being a lad who was doing well at school with 5 GCSEs, getting into the youth offending system, and his life chances being completely destroyed, not by the schooling system, whether or not he was in it, but by decisions that were made by the local authority. And this insight into all of this nastiness that is going on is quite horrible.
I think my sound's back, by the way.
I was going to ask John whether he was seeing more or less of that, and to understand really whether there is a big shift in the way that parents are viewed. There are now, I think there are 70% of mothers work now, so actually a lot of parenting now seems to be expected to sort of outsource it to the state. And one of the things, again, that we've been sent recently was a letter from a local authority asking the mother of a 2-year-old to justify why she hadn't taken up her free childcare vouchers. Now, obviously, free childcare vouchers are marvellous things if you are working and you need to be able to take that up. But to be in a situation now where you're having to justify not taking them up, I find really worrying, and I'm very concerned about whether or not parents are being written out of children's lives more and more at a time when we have increasing mental health issues. When we're saying that 1 in 4 of our young people have mental health problems, I'd like us to be thinking about schools and what's happening in schools and the way that their relationships with their parents and families are able to work alongside the issues around mental health and so on.
Karen,
now,
can you hear me?
I'm going to, I'm still not getting anything from John. Obviously, I could whitter on for a very long time, but I won't. I'll say good evening to you all, and
Karen, you getting me now?
And close this link. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.